welcome Chris Hemmings, journalist, broadcaster, author of the book Be a Man, 2017, and now a therapist, or just about to qualify as a therapist, and
yes,
also speaker in schools on men's issues and positive masculinity. And also the subject of a witch hunt a few years ago, which we can go into if you want. So welcome. Have I missed you? Thank you.
Well, I work in businesses too, but no. Yeah, I wouldn't personally describe it as a witch hunt, but I understand the sentiment. But yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. And you know, at whatever point I don't feel comfortable talking about it, I'll stop. But yeah, no, I'm no longer a journalist. I don't do any journalism anymore. I got out of that game, and I run my empath program near enough full time in schools and businesses now, alongside my therapy work with clients and stuff. So yeah, exciting.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about the empath program.
So when my book came out in 2017, people started reaching out. People, you know, I was featured on the TV and radio quite a bit, and in newspapers, and people started reaching out to me and, you know, do you do talks? And because I'm a man, I said yes. And then I was doing talks for a while in schools, and then the school said, "Oh, we've actually had a workshop cancellation in a couple of weeks. Do you do workshops?" And because I'm a man, I said yes. And so I developed this empathy workshop, and then, actually, after what happened to me online, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point later, I spoke to a lot of men. Well, I say a lot of men. There aren't a lot of men who work in the field. I spoke to some of the men who work in the field around the world who reached out to me to support me, and was encouraged to do the work more full time. So I developed this program, which is it's currently just me, but there's a couple of other guys who I'm in the process of training. Well, we're looking at training them up to do the work in schools. And in schools, I do a talk, and I do around kind of, positive, healthy masculinity, but also about the pitfalls of the expectations that are put upon men by society. And then, I do an empathy workshop, a peer-on-peer abuse workshop, a men's mental health workshop. That's for like years 9s and 10s mainly. And then for year 12s and maybe 13s, but A-levels get in the way. So mainly year 12, I do seminars on masculinity and one on bystander intervention. So the whole idea of the program is to try to plug the empathy gap, right? Because of the societal pressures that are put upon men and boys, by men and boys, but by the whole of society. There is an empathy gap by the time we get to like 13, 14. And I think that personally, I think that is a huge factor in the mental health statistics for men, the addiction statistics for men, and the violence statistics for men. But where my work is very different from the vast majority, if not all of the work that I know of that is happening in the sphere, nearly all of the work post Sarah Everard, nearly all of the men even that I've seen doing the work have pivoted. The Good Lad Initiative became known as Beyond Equality. Like, everything seems to have pivoted to men need to be better for women. Well, my thing is, I use the oxygen mask on a plane analogy, right? That when the oxygen masks come down, we are told to put our own oxygen masks on first before we help anybody else. So my thing is, we are expecting men and boys to suddenly be empathetic and kind and compassionate and caring and to care for other people when we don't even know how to care for ourselves. Right. And we haven't been told to care for ourselves. We've told that actually caring for ourselves is something that we shouldn't do. So for me, it starts with us. And I do that by, for example, saying about the violence statistics. And I say to my audience, 87% of all violent crime is perpetrated by a man. And who are we being most violent towards? And in unison, mostly audiences will go, women. And I'm like, no. 67% of all victims of violence are male. You are more likely to die at the hands of a man. Men are more likely to die at the hands of a stranger on the street than women, and the disparity, the discrepancy is huge. Actually, women are very, very, very unlikely to die at the hands of a stranger on the street. You and I are far more likely to. So this is where my work comes in to say, like,
I got stabbed in the head by with a broken bottle in Leeds when I was about 20.
Right. I got sucker punched on a night out and had my nose broken for no reason. Because some guy thought that I'd looked at his bird funny, basically, right? The classic, right? And so I'm not under any illusion. Like I'm acknowledging that it's men who are the perpetrators, but I'm saying to men, like, we are more likely to be the victims than anyone, unless you're trans, and those numbers are so high, it's not even worth getting into right now because it's ridiculous. But between men and women, we are far more likely to be the victims of violence, but we don't talk about it. And so we don't do so that's where my work is coming in to say, like, before we start even thinking about being better for anybody else, look to your left, look to your right. What are you doing to help your brothers not become one of those suicide statistics, addiction statistics, violence statistics,
right?
All of those.
Yes. And I did some training a couple of years ago with a guy called Dr. Michael Beattie. He's at the London Gender Clinic and I can't remember the name of the other place, but it doesn't matter. But he was talking a lot about the what's it called? The hegemonic masculinity. This concept of a pyramid that is full of men, and men all collude in this male privilege, and
right.
And it's all about competition and being stoic and winning.
Yes.
And I struggle with that idea in many ways, but I also am aware that we have masculine archetypes, and Martin Seeger, the psychologist, has talked about this, and he's pared them down into fighting and winning, mastery of emotions, providing and protecting, risk taking. And so are you saying that your work is kind of, where do you sit on that sort of those theoretical models?
It's a really good question. So actually, I previously used to quote those Martin Seeger things a lot, and to say that, like, the fighting and the winning, the providing and the protecting, like, they're not inherently bad things, but they are to me a structure that was created when they were necessary. And in a modern day society, they are becoming less and less necessary. And so for me, it is to say to men, well, look, the world is changing. We are not going to roll the tide back, which I know there's a lot of men out there who wish that would happen. And actually, it's how can we as men, first of all, not feel shame about being who we are, because we are a product of a system that has created us this way, right? And we are being told that we have to change overnight, right?
Is it a system? Is it a system, or is it biological?
Well, I think it's both, right? And I do believe that there is biology in it, because I'm 6'3", right? I'm a big guy. I'm very strong. Like, I can't help that. Testosterone exists and it does have impacts on us. I also think that it is heavily sociological. But the thing is, every single person plays into that system. Like, women play into that system just as much as men do, right? We all uphold this idea. And I just think that these ideas are becoming outdated. And what we can do is we can start to update them, not to get rid of them altogether, right? Because, for example, one of the big things I talk about is, you as a man, you want to appear to be brave and tough and strong, right? And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But when strength is emotional redundancy, I think that causes us problems. So so you can be strong in different ways. I don't care how much you can bench press, and I never will, right? My line is, that's a fluke of biology and spending too much time in a gym. But who's going to be the strong one in your group of mates to speak up when something going on around you is wrong, or to be the one that holds your friends in times of need, right? Because that's real strength to me. Because masculinity is wonderful, right? When it's harnessed the right way. And I'd never use the term toxic masculinity because it's demonizing and it's divisive and it doesn't help. But what we're really talking about when we talk about toxic masculinity, what we're talking about is our traits associated with the negative traits associated with the expectations put upon men. So again, we shame men for behaving in ways that we have been taught for generations is the way that we have to be taught, that the way that we have to be. Right?
Yeah, let's use a specific example so people can really grok this. So in the book, The Boy Crisis, Warren Farrell talks about the 5 Ds, I think it is: dinner, date, driving, diamonds. Can't remember the other one. But you look pretty cheap if you take a girl out for a date. If you meet a girl on a dating app,
yeah,
kind of have to. You don't have to, but I would feel weird not getting the dinner,
not paying for, exactly. I completely
understand
that.
That's on me, but it's also
no, but it's not on you. I don't think it is on you. I think that's unfair because you are a part of a system that has created you to think that way, right? And I would say that increasingly younger generations, more and more women don't expect that. But there are some that still do. And there are some cultures which still very much uphold that. I would say that I don't have figures, but I would say that the numbers are decreasing. But I do a thing in my audiences when they are mixed. And I was at a school 2 days ago, and I said to the girls in the audience, how many of you would like to be a housewife when you leave school? How many of you would like to be kept and to not have your own job and to not have your own? And one girl out of 200 put her hand up. And so I'm saying to the boys, like, the world is changing around us, but we are still told that we have to be the ones that buy everything and control it and everything. So it's so confusing for us.
Yeah, it's like lose-lose, isn't it? Because if you don't buy dinner, you look a bit lame and cheap. But if you do, it's like some elements of the traditional role are still kind of accepted, but many of them aren't. It's very asymmetrical. It used to be defined.
Well, there are many double standards, and the more I do my work, the more double standards I come across. It's really, really frustrating. I find double standards in a lot of places with my work with boys. For example, society is currently demanding that boys talk more, and I have a real issue with the terminology that men need to talk more, because every man I know never shuts the hell up, right? But like, it's so much more difficult than that. But then I go into the businesses and I say, well, okay, because my job at the businesses partly is to try to convince them to let me help them create men's wellbeing networks, because they have one for women, ethnicity, LGBT, like every possible diaspora that there is, but there isn't one for men. And when I ask why, they say, well, why do men need one? The whole world is a men's network. And I'm like, right, you're proving my point. You're telling that men, you want men to speak up, and so one construction company I work in is 80% male, obviously construction. They have no provision for their men, and they're asking, and they're hoping to create institutional change. And I'm like, well, how? If you're not speaking to 80% of your workforce? And this is the problem, is that so young men are still being taught by messaging from the media and from older generations and stuff that you know, that they should be the one that pays, and that they should be the one that is strong, and that they should risk their own lives if there is something happening on the street, that we are the ones that have to be that, whilst at the same time also embodying emotional literacy and caring and compassion. Now, I do think that we as men have the capacity to do that, but that is hard. It's like we're being expected to be all things.
That's an advanced spiritual practice to be able to access all of those energies and integrate them. It takes a lifetime.
10 years I've been working on it, and I'm only just about getting to grips with it now, right?
It's hard. It takes a lot of work.
I think. Yeah, exactly.
Well, what tends to happen in my experience anyway, it's like a bit more time goes on, and then I kind of go, oh God, and I can sort of come into awareness of more of how I was before. And I'm just like,
yeah. So my message to young boys is, when you were born, you were not given the option to opt in to this framework. This framework was put upon you, right? You are, to use computer terminology, you were auto opted in. Now, you do have the option to opt out, right? But I'm under no illusion about how difficult that will be. And opting out is a wide-ranging, complex choice. Now, what I say to them is, I've been doing this work a long time, and I've yet to meet a man who has opted out, who regrets it. But for many of them, it's been the most difficult thing they've ever done in their entire life, because every step out of the framework that they take, they get shamed by men, and then they get called pussy and stuff by women, and then, you know, women don't know how to handle a man who cries as much as men don't know how to handle a man who cries, right? So it's really, really hard for us. So we are struggling in this, and you know what, men are really, really, really struggling right now with our place within the social spectrum, right? We're not really sure, because we are no longer expected to be the breadwinner, and women are increasingly earning as much money as men.
Well, they're doing way better in their 20s.
Yeah, exactly.
And in education.
Exactly. Yeah, and in education, of course. Yeah, I'm reading Richard Reeves' book at the moment of Boys and Men, and it goes into that. I could highly recommend it. And then, so we're also being, but then young boys, we're not being encouraged into health and education and art and literature and those things. And so actually, there's research just out from the US right now that post-pandemic, 20 to 35-year-old men have the lowest rate of return to work, because we don't really know where our place is in society right now. Now, I'm not saying woe is men, right? That, because I don't think that helps. But where my work comes in now is, it's like, I'm not saying that we should row back the tide of the gains that women have made, but can we please acknowledge now that for the last 50 years, men have stagnated, if not worse, and maybe it's time we can do both. You know, what Richard Reeves uses this terminology is like, we can hold two thoughts in our head at the same time, but actually in society right now, we really, really can't.
Good point.
It's the zero-sum game thing, right?
Yeah. And there are these real stress points in the life cycle of the male. Like, middle-aged men are so bad at cultivating friendship networks and keeping friends. And we've lost the church, we've lost the community, the anchoring in the local community. And so what happens to a man who gets divorced?
Well, yeah, and I was going to say that, and many of them have lost their relationships and their children subsequently too, because of the social. So young kids say this to me a lot as well. It's like, why is it that men don't, you know, the women always get the kid, right? Because I do a thing in my masculinity seminar where I ask the question, well, who makes better parents, men or women? And they always say, well, neither, like they're equal. And I said, well, why is it? Why are the statistics how they are in family court? Because we as men still have the expectation to go out and earn the money and do everything. And so when women's groups rightly talk about the unpaid work of caring for children, right? Men then get punished for going out and earning the money. And then a woman can easily say, well, you know, I've spent most of the time with these children. Dad's been out of work. They know me best. So I guess it does make sense for the children to live with the mum in most cases, but that's the dad just gets ostracized more and more. For what? For doing what's expected of him and what the family wanted him to do, which was to go out and feed the children. It's really, really tough. And so I understand, well, I don't understand because I'm not one, but these guys, I can't even begin to imagine how difficult it is for them.
I mean, even for men in marriages that are more or less functioning, I mean, through my clinical work, I know of cases where the man will be earning good money, paying for everything, and still feel resentment from his wife somehow. It's sort of this oblique resentment, and not be willing to have sex, not be willing to have intimacy with him, and he'll be pitching in with the kids and designing his work around that to make it work. And even then it won't be enough, and there won't be an avenue to work through this and have a conversation, because there's this, I don't want to sort of over egg it, but there definitely is a pejorative tone around men just at large, and I think in some.
I don't think you're over egging it. I think if anything, you're trying to be polite about it.
Because
I think men are being spoken about like we're absolute pieces of shit most of the time these days.
That's what I hear through clients. So I'm kind of, I sometimes struggle to so what, you can't win, what are you supposed to, but then we come back round to that, well, we're responsible for everything that we collude with, or what, it's what you tolerate, isn't it? So at a certain point you have to decide, okay, am I going to stay in this marriage knowing that these are the limitations, or am I going to leave knowing what could happen? And what could happen is I lose my attachment bond with my kids. So many men just go, okay, well, I'll stay. I mean, I spoke to 2 men in the last week who've been in that situation, and God knows how many people this is happening to. And it's not just exclusive to men. Many women are in similar binds, but it's different because if you're a man, you don't have power over, you don't have reproductive rights, you don't have rights to your children. So it's a very different equation in terms of the family separation.
And this the issue here is, I can imagine somebody listening, watching this, and doing these poor men whinging about blah blah blah. Oh, what have they got to worry about, right? Well, loads of things, loads of stuff, because we're all human, right? And I've recently been spoken to at university because we were doing a thing about we're doing a day on differences, and nothing was mentioned about men. And I just said at the end, like, this idea of privilege, right? I'm a privately educated middle-class white guy, right? So I accept that I have some privilege. In fact, I'm a bad example because I have many, many more privileges than most because of my psychotherapeutic work. I understand how my parenting and my childhood was so good, right? But there are many, many men who were brought up with all of the privileges on paper that I had, who are completely fucking messed up, who have emotional redundancy and emotional literacy. Let's not even talk about white working class boys and the issues that they're facing right now of being having the lowest life expectancy and standards of any social group within the UK, right? That just as a society right now, we are getting very close to a point of being almost dismissive of men, but then also saying to men, but we need you to speak up. We need you to start being better. We need you to behave yourselves. But when you do speak up and say that you have problems, we go, well, no, we have problems because of you. You don't have problems. Like, what? How dare you say that about men? That is completely and utterly unfair. Because if you say to a group of people, you don't have problems, you just cause us problems, you know what's going to happen to those group of people? They're going to say, fuck you. And they're going to go further and further away from the important conversations that I think need to happen. And that is what happened to me online. That's the experience that I had, was during the time of Sarah Everard. I spoke up on the BBC, and I actually reposted a video knowing that it would cost me my job at the BBC, because I didn't want to be a hypocrite. And at a time when I was constantly telling men that we needed to speak up. So I literally cost myself a job at the BBC by reposting this video for editorial reasons, which I won't bore you with. And then a couple of people basically were like, but this guy's not perfect, so we shouldn't listen to him. One woman accused me of sexual harassment, which was accurate. Like I said, I made a comment about her body at a party 5 years ago, which was not okay, but like, grand scheme of things. And then somebody made a false allegation of sexual abuse against me, which was quickly retracted, but did the damage that it was meant to do to me. And so I had loads of men then reach out to me and say, why would I speak up? You're asking men to speak up. Why would I speak up when I've just seen what's happened to you? And then I had a load of load of guys, middle-aged guys at one of the big 4 accountancy firms in the city. I spoke to them the other day, and they said, and I quote, I don't feel comfortable setting up a men's group here because I know what will be said about it. And I know that people will say to me that I am taking up space that other people should be taking up. Because exactly. Because we as men are being constantly told that we don't need space to talk about our problems. We just need to solve everybody else's.
Well, is it possible? I was talking to Mike Bell, who set up Equilaw and the Family Court Reform Coalition the other day. And his take on this, he's thought very deeply about this. And I tend to agree with him. His take is that we evolved to be expendable. Men did. You know, the most valuable people in the tribe are fertile women.
Yeah.
If you can ensure the survival of the fertile women, you could lose 80 or 90% of the men and still survive. So the men hold the perimeter. And in order to be effective at doing what needs to be done in war or hunting, the men need to be able to band together, but they also need to be able to disconnect from empathizing with themselves and each other, and not think about their own needs. And that's why men have always been able to march off to war, and they're still doing it. And that it isn't really a deep cognitive thought process that leads them to that decision. It's just an instinctual one. Mm-hmm. He was mentioning that TV clip of the soldier in the Ukraine coming to the Polish border with his family, giving them all a kiss, and then turning around and walking back. And it's moving, and it's timeless. And so what the guy in the Big Four was saying is that really, isn't it? It's that it just doesn't feel right. And yeah, I agree. It's a message that's out there that's being disseminated, but it's also almost a pre-verbal, instinctual. It's sort of like trying to put two norths together. It just like doesn't quite feel right. But in my experience, and I'm sure for you as well, when I finally got into men's circles, I was just like, oh yeah, I kind of almost remember this feeling. It's like this is in my blueprint. This was one of the things I expected but didn't receive when I was growing up. You know,
that's such a lovely way of phrasing it. It's something that on some deep subconscious level you expected but you didn't receive. Like that's what it is, right?
Yeah.
That's such a lovely way of putting it. Thank you.
They're not my words, by the way. It's Francis Weller, an American psychotherapist. 7 Gates of Grief. Check that. Okay, but really lovely.
Thank you for bringing that into my existence, because that makes so much sense. Because that for me is what it is. Because once I did start to re-engage with my empathy, because for me, my empathy was always there. It's just that all of the messaging that I got kind of forced me to push it down and ignore it, right? When I did start to re-engage with that, and yes, in men's circles and just in general in life, it felt so natural to me. It wasn't like I had to learn it. It was just like I had to remember it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. You know, I got into therapy wondering if I had empathy. I was literally thinking, I don't know if I, and then I started working at the Samaritans, and I was like, oh, I think maybe I
Yeah.
can do this. Yeah.
Research shows that you can teach empathy. You just can.
Well, it's osmosis, it's mirror neurons, isn't it? You spend enough
Yeah.
time in a process group. Process group for non-therapists is just you sit together with other therapists and you just share what's going on, and there might be really difficult moments where people trigger each other, and you learn to strip away all the bullshit and just own how you feel without putting stuff on anyone else, but being honest about
Yeah.
how how you feel in response to them and what they do and say. And it's a stripping away rather than a layering up of, because we go through life getting given all this stuff, like information, knowledge, skills, and that's, for me, that was how I imagined learning. It was kind of trying to internalize more stuff. But my therapeutic career seems to be just of a different order completely. It's just coming out of those structures, if anything. There's theoretical stuff to think about and learn, but most of it's really just about connecting with how fucking powerful we are and how much we really know, but forget.
Yeah. And for me, one of the key tenets of, because I only work with male clients, right? And one of the key tenets of the work that I do with the men is the thing that I realize most of all is that my male clients, they need to be given permission to feel. They need to be told quite firmly, actually, some of them, you have to do this, actually, otherwise you're not going to heal. You are capable of this. You have to do this. And most of all, it's okay that you do this. It's okay that you feel. And I'm not going to go anywhere. We have all the time in the world. I'm not expecting you to do it right now. But at some point, you have to give into it. But to not underestimate just how challenging that is for a 30-year-old man who, for 30 years, has been told that he is not allowed to feel because of those. That's why I call it the system, the generational programming, that he is at any moment, he has to be willing to suppress all of his fear and whatever, and put himself at risk of death on behalf of others, right? Partly, and many other things too. So it doesn't surprise me about how difficult it is. But for me, with my male clients, it's like giving them permission. Like, this is the space where you can try for the first time. And, having a client who cried for 6 of the first 7 sessions, right? And it was like, and I'm just sat there going like, great, keep going. Just keep going. Cry as much as you need to. I'm not going to go anywhere. And you see the confusion, like it's the fight within them that they have to, and that's why I talk about the bravery and the strength. Like, you can be brave right now because this is true bravery right now, fighting against all of this stuff, and to actually be how you really feel right now is fucking terrifying. And I know because I've done it myself. So trust me, I know, brother, how hard this is. And I'm going to be here in the trenches. Use that terminology with them. I'm going to be here in this trench with you until you can start to clamber out yourself. But it's so hard.
Yeah. It just struck me then as you were talking that it's so obvious. I don't know why I haven't understood this before, but as male therapists working with men, we've got, okay, so a client might come in with stuff that's presenting with symptoms that they think is the reason why they're coming. But in order to even begin, we have to go back and do a kind of orientation, emotional, like what are how do you feel?
Yeah.
Not always, but yeah, I can really relate to what you.
I've got I've lost it now. See if I can remember it. So I'm coming up with this thought process at the moment about this 3-point thing that for men that we need for my clients in order to get them to a point where they are able to be right. So the first point actually is to have the literacy, the emotional literacy, to even know how to feel and then to verbalize what it is that they feel, right? So the first point is, what is it that you're feeling and what does it feel like? The second point then is, why are you feeling these things? And that is where deep therapeutic work comes in. And then the final point is, now can you feel the freedom to actually express them? And if you can get each of those 3 points, I think then you will leave. And look, this is something that I'm really just working on right now. And I'm aware that this is not going to solve like deep traumatic, it's not trauma work, right? But for me, what it's about is alleviating the normalized male alexithymia sort of work, which is that men, we just don't know how to do those things. But you can't just tell a man to express your feelings when he doesn't know why he's feeling them and he doesn't even have the vocabulary to express them in the first place.
He's got no mechanism to process and allow movement through his system. So right. It's all getting stuck in his cells, and that's probably pulling him into fight, flight, freeze all the time. And
absolutely,
rage is just unresolved, unprocessed emotion. So when people say, yeah, it's toxic masculinity, yeah, young lads are getting stabbed and stuff all the time because they're not being shown anything, how to fucking work their own systems. So yeah, it's really sad.
Yeah. And for me, the why, right, is obviously where you and I come in, like big time, is the why. Something I find myself saying to my clients over and over and over again is they say, oh God, I feel like this and I feel like that. And I go, it would be weird if you didn't feel like that based upon all of these things that you have told me. But they feel weird feeling anxiety about something because they haven't truly experienced it properly or allowed themselves to fully express it properly until they've sat in a therapeutic space. But for me as a therapist, or for us as a therapist, to go like, yes, obviously you feel like that. So like, good, feel it. Yeah, feel it. And then, the kind of polyvagal theory and their system just starts to go like, oh, what? Oh, wait. Oh, yeah. Oh, this is perfectly normal for me to be sad, given that my mum left when I was like 9 years old and I never saw her again. Or like, I had a death in the family when I was a teenager. And it's like, yes, precisely. And you're now just starting to feel that. But we expect men to take this huge leap forward in society, like to go from where you and I know is a place of emotional ineptitude, because I've been there myself, to suddenly go, feel and talk about your emotions and be caring and compassionate for everybody, and stop being violent and stop experiencing all of these things that you are. It's
like, fuck off.
Right.
That's what's coming up for me. It's like,
yeah, precisely.
I know how I feel. I've been lost for years. I don't fucking know what I'm doing. And I'm just spending 40% of my psychic energy just holding it down and putting my game face on and trying to get.
Interesting. That's so interesting that you said 40%. I don't know where that came from, but I started telling this anecdote. I was at a party recently, and given the work that I do, when people find out what I do for a living, oftentimes people come and show some interest. And this guy I was chatting to this guy outside, and he's like a 50-year-old bloke, and he's just come out of 3 months of rehab. He's been in 11 years of drug addiction post going through a divorce, right? So guy's had a tough old time. And he's gone through his rehab and he's done some stuff around his masculinity. And he said that the thing that he's realized after all of this work on himself is that about 40% of his personality has remained hidden until he was 50 years old. And I was like, I talked to him about which parts of it, and he was like, the freedom of expression, the caring, the crying, the feeling, the whatever. And I was like, what's it like on the other side of that now, Steve? And he was like, so much more beautiful. And I'm like, right. But what was it like to get there? And he was like, it was a nightmare. It's like, right.
Yeah.
So, and then we wonder why loads of men don't do it, because we know how hard it's going to be.
Well, if it's not even in your conceptual framework of reality, you don't have any way to relate to that there's this other place on the other side of that where you have 40% more
yeah
so you don't know it's possible, and you don't know how to do it. Even if you did know, then that's why people kill themselves. There's a narrower and narrower range of options until the chink of light disappears, and then there's just like suffering and pain, and it's like, what's the point? It's like there isn't a lot of point at that point.
No, and that's the existential crisis, right? Yeah. That's the epitome of, like, what is the point of my existence? Like the person that I am and the way that I experience myself, there doesn't seem to be anywhere for this being to fit into this world now. So why would I stay in this world, right? And it's where the incel movement comes from too. That
really needs to be served. I've worked with a few, and that is such a huge area of need. Like, failure to launch, failure to get into relationships, gaming, porn addiction, not even going out and getting vitamin D, just sitting. And
what does society do to these men? It mocks them, laughs at them,
calls them school shooters and losers.
Right. But then also these men, those networks, because I've studied them a bit, like they don't help each other, right? Because they're constantly sending each other pictures and saying, you're disgusting, you don't have the Adam's apple or the cheekbones or whatever. Like, It's not helping. But understand where that is coming from. That comes from deep insecurity, and actually at the very, very core of it, a desire to connect human to human. And so they connect on being outcasts. And so they further entrench themselves in being outcasts. Mm. But there's so much mockery of these people, right? And it's so sad, because these are more humans that we're just laughing at, right? I find it, it's appalling. I find myself increasingly becoming more and more outraged, and I try not to be outraged because it doesn't help with the way that men are being spoken about now. And you're asking, so I say this to audiences, you are asking. So the one thing I say very often, women and girls who are in my talks or businesses and schools or whatever will say to me, well, what can we do as women, or what can we do as girls? And I say, well, look, first of all, in terms of your emotional labor interpersonally, you already do plenty. So that's not it, right? The main thing actually that I would like to ask of you is you need to be extremely patient, because you are requesting, rightly in some cases, that men get on board with societal change and that men become a part of it. But then when men don't match up to that immediately, you shame them and you shame us and you push us back down and say, well, this is, men are still behaving in this way, and so all men are disgraceful. And it's like, that's not helpful.
Shame is contra
Yes.
indicating. What's the expression? Contra predictive to therapeutic change.
Yeah.
And I mean, I suppose I've got to be slightly careful here, but the therapy professions are heavily feminized and dominated by women. There's 80% of therapists in the UK are female, which is fine. That's okay. But I've heard an alarming number of stories from clients about going to marriage therapy, couples counselling, and basically being told that they need to sort their shit out by the therapist, who just sides with the woman, and just inappropriate. Bringing judgment and shame into the therapy room is never. It's not what therapy is.
No.
Like, you cannot work therapeutically if you're bringing any re-education program into the therapeutic room. It's a question. It's an exploration. It's not.
It's not coaching.
It's not coaching.
Yeah. But that to me is the next step for this, right? Because you hear all of this conversation between us, and I think these sorts of conversations need to happen more. The problem is this: these conversations need to happen more amongst men, by men, for men. So my issue then comes when, so recently, for example, this is just a microcosm of it, right? J.K. Rowling has opened up a woman's only domestic violence shelter in Scotland, right? So so cis women only, right?
Okay.
The whole issue around the trans thing is whatever, right? It is a ridiculous conversation I'm not even going to get into right now. Loads of men speak up and say, why aren't you opening one for men? Well, then my thing then is, well, hang on, guys. Why are we not doing that for each other? And that, for me, is where this starts to fall down. It's because we as men are not doing enough of the advocacy work for each other. I go into businesses and I'm keeping tallies. 3 out of 30 something now businesses that I've been into over the 5 years, 3 times I've been invited in by a man, right? Why are there no men's networks? Well, have you tried to set one up? Well, no, right. When women 40 years ago wanted to set up women's networks, I am almost certain that they were called all sorts of names by the lads in charge, right? But they kept going and they kept fighting. We haven't been trained to do that as men. So it's even more difficult for us, right? I get that. But this is where we go back to the bravery and the strength of, like, come on, we know that this is right. This guy, I'm not going to say the name of the company, who reached out to me. I did a talk at their business, big company. And he was like, I'm going to do this, Chris. Like, you inspired me to do it. I'm going to go to management and demand money for a men's network. And I'm going to tell them what it really is going to be about. And I'm going to make sure it happens. And if they won't do it, I'm going to help them run it if it goes ahead. And he was like, and if they won't listen to me, I'm going to get you in for a day and you're going to come and speak to them, because I'm like, yes, like, come on. Okay. Yeah. Like, he's doing it. And it's like, he's the first one so far. All the other ones have been the women's network getting me in, and then say, oh, we'll help you set up a men's network. And I'm like, no, you won't. No, you won't, because then it won't work, because it needs to be men doing it. So that's the problem for me, is that we haven't been trained in advocacy for ourselves because we haven't needed it, but we do need it.
It goes back to the sort of circuit breaker, the instinctual bit that just goes, no, we shouldn't be doing this. Mm-hmm. We're supposed to be, it's women and children that need that stuff.
Yeah.
So it's not a great conspiracy. Or maybe it is and it isn't. Maybe it's a bit of, it's a discursive message, isn't it? It's disseminated in the mainstream culture, but it's also coming from within. It's not put on men any less.
But it's felt.
It's felt, but it's coming up from within men, and it's outside men. It's everywhere.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because if you believe in epigenetics and if you believe in generational programming, which I do talk a lot about, so I obviously do. If nowhere in your ancestral history has a male in your family been taught that it's okay to speak up and ask for help, how do you expect that you can just one day go, oh, that's all I need to do? Okay, cool. Like, I'm a fucking trainee psychotherapist and I've been running men's groups for years, and I've been studying this for 10 years, writing about asking for help is still one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. When I was suicidal after all of that stuff happened to me online and I was called a sexual abuser when I am not, I still found it really difficult to reach out and ask for help. And I found it most difficult to reach out and ask for help from other men. Because when I've been growing up and I've been, I went to speak to a load of 12-year-olds at my old school, and I asked them, when you fall down and scrape your knee, or when you have something that you're hurt, or when you're confused or sad, who do you go to for comfort and safety? Mum or miss? Mum or miss? Every time. So we have to break that cycle somehow.
That's just triggered a thought, actually, which is this idea of the warrior coming back to the village after a battle in which he's accessed the berserker energy. He's gone into his rage. He's accessed his capacity to just go fucking nuts in service, and he is then brought down by the women in the tribe. His hot rage and his, I guess, battle fury is still kind of going around his system, and the women bring him down gently to land, and they're so grateful for the fact that he could access that power, but it comes at such, it's dangerous for others, but it's also dangerous for the man, and
dangerous for everyone.
It needs holding, and women have always been the ones that support young boys. Young boys need more than little girls. They actually need more tenderness and care, because I don't know what it is, but I've seen it in my kids, but it's been talked about a lot. They need more soothing, they need more comforting. There's more going on inside them. I don't know what, I can't give you evidence.
I think I understand what you mean, though. There's more of an inherent, maybe, like a predisposition for heightened.
Yes, and then there's these surge, like massive spike in testosterone at 4. What? That's and there was I think there's stuff happening in the womb already, isn't there? But
yeah,
definitely something at 4, and it's a lot. It's a lot to hold in one organism. So it's just what you just said there. It's making me think, yeah, we need more brotherhood. We need more men's circles. We need more men's networks. But also, have we lost, in losing the traditional gender roles and the division of labor at home, have we lost the hearth? Have we lost that archetypal soothing figure of the mother who is still in the village? Like, everyone's just scattered now, aren't they? Hardly anyone stays in the same village.
Well, let me tell you my experience, because when all of that stuff happened online, even though I had a partner and she was wonderful with me at the time, ex-partner now, but she was wonderful with me at the time. The morning after I was falsely accused and all of the Twitter storm rained down upon me, I was sat in a room at my partner's house and I called my mum, and I'm a 35-year-old man in tears. And I said, Mum, I'm coming back to Manchester. I live in London. I was like, I'm coming home. Because I wanted my mum. Because my child had been battered and wounded, right?
Yeah.
And I wanted my mum. And I, you know, I still call my mum now with good news, bad news, with everything, right? And yeah, there's something in that. And if we're increasingly living in a society that is telling men that they need to be more in tune with this and that, but then there aren't spaces for that, then what, we're setting men up to fail.
Mm.
And I think that's what's happening right now. Young boys, young men at the moment are being set up to fail. We are not, and we have to take, again, we as men have to take the lead on this for each other, I genuinely believe. But this is why I do my work. And I always say to sometimes the girls will say, well, before I've started, like, well, why am I here? This is about men. And I'm like, we as men are being constantly told about the female experience of existence, which I think is great. Maybe you should hear about the male experience of existence. And maybe it will help you to understand how the men are in your life and what it is, why it is that your dad, you feel like you can't talk to your dad, even if you're a 12-year-old girl and your dad really struggles to engage emotionally with you. Well, this is why, right? Because he's been trained that way. And it's not his fault. And yes, as men, we have to take personal responsibility for our actions. I get that. But when we're telling young boys that everything that they do is damaging to other people, and that, that a core part of who they are is toxic, and that they have to, wholesale change, and then not give them any structures or strategies to do that, then how are they expected to do that? That's why my rhetoric to young boys is this. I say to them, I am not asking you to change who you are. What I'm offering you is to try to figure out who you really are underneath all of those pressures that have been put upon you, because that's what it's about. You're being told that you need to change. What I'm saying to is that you have been changed, and actually we can try to change you back. Because that's what my experience was. Between 15 and 25, I was pretending to be someone that I wasn't. And I had a lot of fun during that time, don't get me wrong, but I was not being authentically myself. And then at 25, I started to unpick it. And by the time I was 30, I realized that I'd become the person that I should have been the whole time, or could have been the whole time, I should say. And so how can we help men to drop the pretense and the bravado that we don't need anymore? I don't think it doesn't serve us anymore.
What led you on that journey? Because that's quite young, isn't it? In comparison,
my dad died when I was 25, and 3 months after, 3 months after standing in giving the eulogy at his funeral and pretending not to cry, my friends pulled me out of a cocaine and alcohol spiral. And given I'm meant to be smart, but also mainly because I was a journalist, I started to think, maybe there's a story in this, and told my own story to myself. And then I started to, I found out 10 years ago that the biggest killer of men under the age of 45 is suicide. And I was just like, fuck, okay, what? And from then on, I just haven't stopped thinking about it ever since, every single day, because it's just mad. It's absolutely mad. And then the question to me was, as a journalist, like, I wonder if there's a bigger story here. And it turns out to be a huge underestimation. It
could be the biggest story of our time.
Yeah.
I don't think
I think it is. I think it affects everything.
And everyone.
Yeah.
It's not just about men. It's about men and children.
Yeah.
And it's about, you know, I mean, I'm a bit of a skeptic on the climate change agenda and things like that. We don't need to go into it, but there is environmental degradation happening on a massive scale, and it has a direct impact on that as well.
Yeah. And men are far less likely to engage in ecology discourse. I have my issues with capitalism and hyper-capitalism, and I'm not going to get into that, right? But men mostly are driving that, and it's like, why and what, and why are you wearing a watch that's worth more than the house that I'm in? Like, why? What? Why does that make me? Why does that make you think that I'm going to think better of you? Like, and that's not to say I don't buy into it. Sure, some of the time, but yeah, I think it is a big player. The kind of masculine dominance rhetoric, I think, is a big player in the vast majority of, I don't want to say societal ills, because that's too broad, but like the problems that we in society are experiencing.
Yeah.
But it's too easy to just say, men are at fault because.
So let's get like quotas for more women CEOs. I just find that stuff really, yeah, it's not.
But it doesn't solve any problems.
No,
it's a sticking plaster. It's a sticking plaster.
No dressing.
Yeah. It doesn't address the root causes of things, and that's what I think needs to happen more. Yeah.
Good stuff.
So yeah, it's a, I feel like this program that I've launched, I feel it's been going properly for just over a year now. I mean, like, I've been into like 50 odd schools, 15 businesses. For me, it feels like it's in its infancy, because I feel it in my bones that there is, conversations with women now who are a lot of women in my life in particular, who are going, yeah, you know what, maybe this has gone too far. Maybe we do need to start helping men and boys out. Maybe this fourth wave of feminism. There was a great quote by Hadley Freeman in her piece in the Times the other day, which obviously spoke to me given my experience. And I'll just read it to you, right? So much of fourth wave feminism was based on individual women's experiences rather than collective change. On the plus side, this led to Me Too. On the downside, it led to women seeing validation of their experiences as their feminist right. This was epitomized by the mantra, quote, believe women, which was well intended, but utterly unworkable if a society believes in due process and doesn't think anyone should be damned as a sex offender on the basis of allegation and rumor. Now, obviously, that spoke to me given my experience, and people were like, he's a monster, he's a predator, he's a whatever, right? But actually, if we take that back a step, it's this idea that women's experiences now are taken as universal and as gospel, and that every single tiny infraction that a woman experiences is given credibility and credence and held up and say, look, men are causing these problems, right? But on the other hand, when we as men go, well, hey, but first of all, we're not all doing that, but I understand that we all have a part to play in the systems that has created that, like, fair enough. But also we have been taught to behave like that. But then also over here, we have massive problems as men. We're killing ourselves. We're far more likely to experience violence and drug and alcohol addiction. But we don't. But when we speak up, you tell us, well, and I'm going to directly quote somebody who is a former friend. I told them that I'd been falsely accused of sexual abuse, and the quote was, "Well, it's not as bad as being raped, is it?" Brilliant.
Cheers.
Or when I told another former female friend about my experience, and she said, and I said, well, I was feeling suicidal because I was for a time, and she was like, "I think you're being pathetic." If I was to tell you that you were feeling suicidal because you'd been sexually assaulted, and I was to tell you that you were being pathetic, I mean, I literally couldn't say that. But because I'm a man, I just have to get up and get on with my day and carry on. And then on the other hand, you're complaining that men aren't behaving appropriately towards you. But when a man does speak up about his experience, you're telling him it's not valid.
Mm.
Do the equation.
It's very subtle as well. It's like I remember saying to a friend, a female friend, when I was going through family court, and I was very worried and just really struggling, and talking to her about it, and she said, "But you don't really want to have to look after your child, do you?"
What?
Yeah. And other people is people very close to me said things like, I mean, you will get to see him. It's just, it'll be all right. And it's like, no, it won't be all right, because my relationship with my child is being blocked. It's like, it's almost as if, there's like, I think what I'm trying to get to is, I don't think it's particularly vicious or conscious even. It's just this, it's just this underlying, dads aren't really that interested in their kids. Chris isn't really that upset. It's not that bad. He's all right. Shut up, stop going on about it.
Cool. Then I guess we just go back to suppression. And I guess we just act out all of our suppression through violence and anger. Oh, wait a second.
Done that.
Yeah. That's the thing that you're asking us to stop doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, precisely. That's what I mean. The equation is mad, but that's the paradigm that we're in right now. And for me, how I see it is this, right? With these things. So we've gone from here, the pendulum has swung, right? And very often with these things, I think the pendulum swings too far. And I think Me Too and my experience and stuff, like, I don't discount Me Too had lots of positives, because I think that some of these things needed to be spoken, but kind of like what Hadley Freeman spoke about, where every woman was like, any man who's ever crossed my boundary is a monster. Like, no, these things swing too far. I think I feel like maybe we're getting to I'm going to mix my metaphors here, but the high watermark of this one, right? And I feel like we're going to start swinging back the other way. I have to believe, otherwise I wouldn't keep doing this work. I have to believe that at some point we will find some sort of equilibrium whereby we can say that, yes, female experience of existence is challenging and hard, and that men are difficult, right? And that many men cross boundaries and don't understand boundaries. And that as a result of that, you've experienced a lot of difficulty. We can agree on that. But can we also hold in our hands at the same time the realization that men are struggling and that the male experience of existence is not easy, and that we have our own very specific challenges, and we have our own, and that women are not easy to be around, and that we also experience emotional abuse from women, lots of, actually, and that we also experience threats to our sense of self from women, maybe not violent, but emotional, physical, like, this I hate this thing that men are frightened that women will hurt their feelings, women are frightened that men will kill them. It's like, right, so it's just fine to hurt men's feelings, is it? Because a few women die at the hands of men. And I'm not saying that that's okay. Neither of them are okay. That's the problem. But we just discount one whole thing by saying...
that was in the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh, was in terms of conflict, we have to ask ourselves what we're doing to provoke others. And it's a really challenging, controversial thing to acknowledge, but it's there in the domestic violence literature. It's like, I'm sorry, but if you wind someone up every day and then they snap, it's no excuse for what they do, but
no
part in that.
No. Yeah, someone that I know who is potentially going to come on board with my work. She has been working with domestic abuse victims, people who experienced domestic violence for years. She's about to do a talk, and I'm going to go and watch it when she's got it together. And her thing is to start by saying, anybody who experiences domestic abuse, anybody who experiences domestic violence, it is not your fault. You are not to blame for it. However, if we play into this system that creates men this way, if when we start to see a man behaving in a certain way and we allow it and we placate it and we don't walk out early, right? If we don't take responsibility for ourselves, we have to also, it doesn't negate the fact that he's 100% responsible for his actions, but
No.
but you can also take responsibility for yourself. And one of my big things is this idea that, so we have to see women as capable and strong and whatever, right? But then every woman is talking about themselves within the victim, within the drama triangle as a victim. Well,
that cannot lead to the type of healing you're talking about, can it? Because we have to step out of the drama triangle.
Yeah, which is why with what happened to me, at no point I never want to be seen as a victim. I don't portray myself as a victim. I'm just saying here's an experience that I had that really badly affected me. And there were some people who were not very nice to me, but I don't think that they're bad people. I don't think that they're perpetrators. I just think that they did something that wasn't nice in that moment, and they have their own reasons for it, right? I'm not going to get lost in a victim narrative because that's not going to help me, most of all. But it sure as hell isn't going to help anyone with any healing.
Well, look at what it's enabled you to do. So you've actually taken that experience and used it, turned it from lead into gold. You're actually going into businesses and schools and spreading this message. I think that's wonderful.
And what it has done is it has increased my empathetic understanding more of the male experience, right? Because so many men say, I'm fearful of being falsely accused, or I don't know how to speak to women, or whatever. And then when those men do say that, they get laughed at and shamed for it. Well, now I can say, hey, that's somebody speaking a vulnerability of theirs, which we should be commending them for. And what do? What's just happened? You've just laughed at him. Come on. We can all do better. Because yes, young boys are struggling with interacting with women and girls right now for many, many reasons. And I think that we should talk about that.
It even happened when I went on Times Radio and spoke to Mariella Frostrop. One of their Sunday Times journalists had written a book about why men are so unhappy.
Yeah.
And her intro to the radio show was kind of I can't remember exactly what she said, but it was a sort of sniggering, like it's kind of funny that we're even talking about how men are doing. And yeah, I I really called her out on it.
Good.
Yeah. It's so easy to slip into that for people.
Yeah.
So yeah. Good stuff. It's really good talking to you, Chris. Good to see you again.
Yeah, you too. I hope we continue to have many conversations, because what I like is that you and I don't agree on everything, right? But that's great. This is something again that really frustrates me, is we live in a paradigm now where my way or the highway. If you don't agree with everything that I say, then you're the enemy. what? No, come on. I don't disagree with everything anybody has ever said. I don't agree with everything anybody has ever said. Like, that's not reality. But it's the transactional analysis thing, right? Of trying to constantly meet everybody in the adult. And when people people want to be met in parent or petulant child. Some people want to be met in petulant child, which, you know, cool. Constantly meeting people in adult is challenging, but it's worth it in the end.
It is.
Yeah.
Where can people find you and find your book and course?
Well, the book is no longer in print for reasons I won't go into, so you can't. If you want a copy of it, I'll email you a PDF of it for free. But you can find my website is m-path.co.uk. Cheesy play on words. And yeah, if you want to get me into a business or your school, and yeah, or get me to do whatever, then just let me know. Or want me as your therapist even, then yeah, just let me know. You can find me on there.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.